In episode 64, we introduced you to the Mobile Riverine Force, a joint Army-Navy task force that patrolled the brown waters of the Mekong Delta in an effort to disrupt enemy traffic along the canals and tributaries. You heard a little bit about the history and tactics of the group and what it was like for soldiers and sailors to work and live and fight side by side. In this episode, we'll go a little deeper with stories of enemy engagement, environmental hazard, the lingering effects of the river rat experience, and of course, brotherhood and healing. This episode contains graphic descriptions of combat injuries and death, so it might not be appropriate for every listener. These accounts can be hard to listen to, but for those who can stomach it, we think they're important to hear. Stick around. From the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, founders of The Wall, this is Echoes of the Vietnam War. I'm your host, Michael Crone, bringing you stories of service, sacrifice, and healing from people who still feel the impact of that conflict more than 50 years later. This is episode 65, River Rats, Part 2.
I was the executive officer of a medical clinic, a surgical facility on board the ship. Actually, 4 ships.
Bob Schrader was a battalion surgeon's assistant in the Army. An ROTC graduate from the University of Wyoming, he was commissioned in 1966 and arrived in the Mekong Delta in July of 1968. I asked him what it was like to work with the Navy for the first time.
It was kind of a huge experiment that turned out to work very well. The Navy guys were great to work with, and at all echelons. They just did a phenomenal job. And of course, the Navy chow was a whole lot better than the Army's shoreside chow. A lot of the Navy guys would come to us because they had a need for medical treatment that didn't go into their permanent records and affect their promotion ability.
Whoa, that's interesting. Can you say more about that?
Sure. A lot of the Navy guys would frequent the houses of ill repute on shore. When they got over there, and then when they came back, if they went and reported that to the Navy, it went into their permanent record, and when they were reviewed for promotion, it affected their promotability, particularly the enlisted guys. And so they would come to our facility, and we treated and only kept the record as long as treatment lasted, and then we destroyed them.
Is that right? I wonder who was the first Navy guy to figure that out?
Well, I'm sure it was some high-ranking NCO, at least that sent his guys there.
Mm-hmm. What was it like, just mechanically, to work with the Navy?
I think there was a giant mutual respect, especially for the troops that went with us.
Frank Moran landed at Tan Son Nhut in December of 1967 as a 21-year-old lieutenant. He was assigned to the 2nd Brigade of the 9th Infantry Division, which was the Army element of the Mobile Riverine Force.
Those that were that stayed on the boats, they were okay, they were doing a job. But those that came with us and actually drove the little boats and commanded those little boats had a lot of respect, and I think they had quite a bit of respect for us. I'll give you an incident that I remember. We had one of our guys screw up pretty bad, and the guy on a boat, the ship's captain is allowed to punish you for whatever you do. I mean, they hold the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and they can punish you. Well, one of the punishments that they can do in the Navy still was to put you on bread and water. Now, our guys were Army. We don't have that in our Uniform Code of Military Justice. So when that guy tried to impose it on our guy, our commander went back and said, no, we're going to have to find a different way because that's not in our. So that's going by way of telling you that there are some differences mechanically and administratively that the two branches do different. But I would say overall, I think there was just a tremendous amount of how do we work this out together to make it come out good for both of us.
The veterans I spoke with agreed that over the operational life of Task Force 117, the soldiers of the 9th Infantry Division far outnumbered the sailors involved. But at the MRFA reunion in St. Louis, I saw just the opposite, way more sailors than soldiers. I asked Frank why that might have been the case.
And I don't know the reasons why. I guess, the camaraderie of them was probably better at that time because they were living together. They were on little boats together. But our guys, it was like, let's get this year over with, And I don't know. There doesn't seem to be a logical reason because if you took a look at some of the statistical data for the Navy versus the Army, if you compare the 2nd Brigade to the Navy element of the flotillas, you had almost exactly the same number of men that were killed. I think one of them had 2,500 over the 3-year period, and the other one had 2,600. So they probably saw the same amount of combat.
These numbers are very difficult to verify. According to the Mobile Riverine Force Association website, the 9th Infantry Division had just over 2,600 killed in action, but that number might be for the entire division and the entire war. Only part of the 9th was assigned to the Mobile Riverine Force, and that force only existed from January of 1967 to December of 1970. But Frank's larger point is an important one. Anyone who thinks that the Navy guys were somehow in less peril or less frequent peril than their Army partners is misinformed. Here's Terry Sater, who was a gunner's mate on 2 different Tango boats starting in March of 1968. He later wrote a book about his experiences.
I remember telling the guys that, how they couldn't wait to get off the boat, or the guys were telling me how they couldn't wait to get off the boat. I didn't like getting off the boat. I do remember one time we were going down the river, and it's in my book, but we were going down the river, and I was talking to a guy from the 9th, and he was making actually a disparaging remark about how easy we had it being on the boats, which was unusual. He's the only one I ever heard that from. And we were standing there talking. He was saying how easy it was for us on the boat. And he had a name for us and that. But he was waving his arms around, and about that time we were ambushed, and a chunk of shrapnel went through his hand. And karma, I guess, I don't know. But the guys, it was true. They felt like sitting ducks most of the time on our boat, and we just didn't want to go into the jungle at all. Oh, I had such admiration for them. They went through hell. Seeing them traipsing through the thick jungle and coming back and being knee deep or waist deep in the Mekong when we were picking them up. And there's a picture I saw of a group of them on a Tango boat after we picked them up, and the look of just exhaustion, and I don't know how to describe it. You hear about the 1,000-yard stare, and it'd be kind of like that. But I never heard them complain once. I never heard these guys complain, and that's something I really admired about them.
You said you've got a 7-man crew and more guns than crew. What are the troops that you're carrying, either in or out? What are they doing? Are they just ducking, trying to take cover as best they can, or are they also firing?
It depends on who we were carrying. When we were carrying the 9th Infantry Division, they were the best. They would jump up on the guns, but it wasn't always that way. We carried Vietnamese Marines, the Vietnamese ARVN, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, and sometimes we carried like their National Guard, Regional Force, Popular Force, which we call Rough Puffs. Mm-hmm. And I remember one firefight with them. I was on the well deck, and we were ambushed, and all the rough puffs, the Vietnamese rough puffs, huddled on the deck. Guy who was below my feet or next to my feet while I was manning the 50 and 30 caliber machine guns, and he was in a fetal position, scared to death, and I kicked him and made him get up and reload the machine guns for me. He was a kid, he looked like a little kid, I don't know. But most of the time when we carried troops, especially 9th Infantry Division, they were in the fight with us.
Harry Hahn arrived in Vietnam in March of 1969 as a radio man on a howitzer monitor boat. He is the current president of the Mobile Riverine Force Association.
The enemy would know, you're going to be coming down this canal at some point in time, or you'd be going down this waterway, and they'd set up ambush points, and they got good at it. They would do things like try to catch you in a bend of the river, so that you could, if you shot at the last boats in the column that were already around the bend, they'd be shooting across into the boats at the beginning, and things like that. We lost a lot of boats to mines, mostly to RPGs. Most of the injured in these firefights that we were injured by the rocket-propelled grenades. Even though we had this 1-inch ballistic steel that would be on the sides of the boats, the RPG would penetrate up to 12 inches of conventional steel. And the RPG had something that was called a shape charge. So it would actually turn the ballistic steel into shrapnel. So it would, this shape charge would spin through the steel, and when it got on the other side, it would take the molten steel and fling it all over the place. So you would get pieces of the shrapnel that would be, any size, that would, of course, do everything from producing death to maiming and or producing enough shrapnel that it would create a lot of injured. I mean, there's tales of boats being hit by 3, 4, 5 RPGs at one time. Fortunately, the first boat I was on, which was a monitor, we were fortunate that the RPGs that hit us didn't kill anyone on my boat while I was there, but they certainly injured some of the people on my boat.
On the Tango boats, where there were not much room to move, if something went off in that Tango boat, probably 60-70% of the people were wounded with something. My name is Dale Jones, but you can call me Doc. Everybody else does.
Doc Jones was, of course, a medic. He was drafted into the Army and landed in Vietnam in September of 1968.
Even if it's just small fragmentation wounds, and there's probably 2 inches of blood on the bottom of the boat because of all the minor wounds, and about all you can do is, throw bandages to everybody, and because you can't move, or can't go anywhere, because
there's like 60 guys on there.
Yeah. So, those were, as far as blood goes, probably some of the bloodiest things, because the blood was limited to the bottom of the boat.
As tricky as operations could be in the daylight, they were even more treacherous at night.
Oh, it's inky black. And when you're trying to do this maneuver up the rivers at night, you just have one little tiny red light on the back of the boat in front of you, and that's all the light. So it's, tricky driving. I mean, we did it.
That's Randy Pete, a gunner's mate who served in the Mekong Delta in 68 and 69.
Yeah, so we decided when we knew that this was going to be our mission for a while, to replace the Mark 19. And what I had noted at that point was that the Browning 50 calibers were extremely reliable, and that meant a lot. So I told the boat captain, I said, okay, if we're going to replace it, let's put a 50 in there. So as soon as we got back to the mothership, we talked to the head gunner's mate there, and we took part of the mount off and took it up on the main ship, myself and my assistant gunner's mate, and we worked all night long reforming that mount so we could put a 50 caliber in. Now it's morning, and we're walking off from the pontoons onto the first boat, and we're about 4 or 5 boats rafted out there. And as Benjamin takes the first step, he trips, and the mount goes in the water. So then I thought, oh my God. So I went back up to the ship. Now we're leaving within 15, 30 minutes.
With or without it?
With or without it, we're going. Which I would have just grabbed an M16 or something and shot out the turret with that, but no substitute for a machine gun. So I go back up to the gunner's mate on the ship, and I said, you aren't going to believe this. I said, we deep six that mount. I said, I'll take anything. Do you have anything that I can shoot out that view slit? Because when you get in a firefight, your view slit's about like this. But when you get in a firefight, it feels like it's going like this all the time. So you want to be shooting. So he said, hey, a 20 millimeter will drop right in what's left of the mount. And so he gave me a 20 millimeter in a box made by International Harvester in the 50s. And we took it out and got Cosmily, and he gave me all the right bolts and told me how to do it. And I said, okay. And so off we went. 30 minutes later, we were underway with this box on our well deck and a handful of bolts and what I can remember you said. And we got it in there. And what we didn't have was an electronic way to fire the gun. There was an electronic trigger. And so I had to fire the gun manually. So if you can picture this, out of the bottom of this machine gun, there's a sear, and there was a way to attach a wire to that sear. And so from this, which is what you release when you want to fire the gun, you release the sear. So from the bottom of the sear, we put a piece of wire on it and ran down about 4 or 5 inches off from the deck and put a stirrup, which we had. So I had to put one foot in that stirrup, and then the other foot I had to bounce around, moving the gun around, and then I was doing pointing and training up here, so I had to bounce around and crank down on that thing. But it worked. It worked. The next time we went back to the ship, I got the electronic firing thing, so I didn't have to dance anymore. And I think I put around 4,000 rounds through that thing while I had it, because you had to keep track of approximately how many rounds so you knew when to change out parts. But that thing worked good. And the boat captain told me later, he said, when we get in a firefight, I always feel better when I hear your 20 working. And that's true. I think we all did.
A.J. McCaskey was a 21-year-old draftee in 1968. When he arrived in Vietnam in September, he was assigned to the 9th Infantry Division and sent to Dong Tam. What were your impressions of life on board the ship?
Well, it was air-conditioned ship, which was sweet. The food was great. There was a huge platform kind of a thing anchored to the side of the ship where the supply depot with all the guns and ammo were stored. And then adjacent to the platform were all the tango boats and armed boats. And So, the next morning we get up and put on all the flak jackets and helmets and go down on the platform on the barge there, and they'd load us up with whatever we wanted to carry: grenades, smoke grenades, 45 pistol, and then they were assigned. There'd be 4 or 5 guys with M16s and one guy with a M60 machine gun in the platoon, and get on the Tango boat, and we chug down the river or up the river and go into a tributary and then into another tributary, and they would the Navy guys would prep the shoreline, beat the hell out of it with their 50 caliber or whatever armor they had on the boat, and there were even flamethrowers on a couple of the boats too. And after they pummeled the shoreline, the front end of the boat would go down and off we'd go, and sometimes it was a struggle just to get off because the mud would be up to your knees or whatever. There was a lot of impact from the tides. The river went both ways, or the canals and the tributaries sometimes would reverse direction because of the tide coming in. And I don't know how far from the ocean we were, but it was a ways. And sometimes when we got off when the front end of that boat went down, it was kind of like a World War II scene in my mind. The ramp went down and off we go. Sometimes the ramp couldn't go down because the vegetation was so thick, you'd have to climb up and over it. I distinctly remember a couple of Navy guys just, picking our brain, like, what are you doing out there and what's it like? And God, I wish I could get off this ship and go out there with you guys. And we'd tell them, no, just stay here. You don't want to be out there. Are you familiar with the term LRPs? They're like an Army Ranger. They were long-range reconnaissance patrols.
Mm-hmm.
These guys would go out in groups of 2, maybe 3, and basically spy or try to provide intelligence. They really did not want to engage the enemy, but they would go out and then radio back. There's a regiment here, a company there, and then provide the intelligence of where the elusive Viet Cong were.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, the report was that the LRPs, the Rangers, had found a big cache of weapons and whatever else. It was referred to as Kong Island. Why, I don't know. CONG. So at any rate, everybody piles on the Tango boats and up the river we go, and the front end went down, and just Christ, all hell broke loose. And I mean, they knew we were coming, and it was just a scramble, and just turned into a horrific battle. And it was very early on when I first got there too. I mean, the one Ranger, I was assigned to carry the M60 right at that point in time, and we got our ass kicked off there. I mean, they had 2 guys. The one Ranger, I was just burning. I was burning that M60 machine gun, screaming for ammunition. The Army Ranger beside me was killed. Radio operator was killed, and we managed to get back on the boat and get out of there. We just got our ass kicked, and that was early on. And when that ramp went down, you never knew what the hell to expect.
With names like Snoopy's Nose, Parrot's Beak, and Crossroads, there were certain locations in the Delta where you actually did know what to expect. And it was, to put it bluntly, nothing good. Here's Frank Moran.
Anybody who was ever on a boat knows about Snoopy's Nose. And what happened there, Michael, is the nose, if you would, is a little, let's say, 3/4 circle. All right. And when your ship is coming in on the bottom of the circle, they're going to allow you to go to a certain part to go back to the top. Now you got a string of boats going all the way from the bottom of the circle to the top. So they put one or two guys in the middle. He starts shooting at the bottom one. The bottom one has the Navy with 50 caliber guns that can shoot. This thing was probably about a kilometer or a kilometer and a half, as far as big as it was. So he starts shooting at the boat at the bottom. The Navy on the top has got 50 caliber, so they're shooting at that noise, and now those bullets are hitting the convoy that's up on the top.
Mm-hmm.
So it just creates havoc. There was a place called a Crossroads, and Crossroads was next to a town called Bentre, Bentre, 2 words. And I don't remember a time going there where we didn't really get shot at and severely wounded. On one of those operations in, I think it was April the 8th, I lost 8 men on that operation. What happened, Michael, is that when they beached us, there was a machine gun waiting, and you're extremely vulnerable when you're inside that little boat, and you're trying to get out, and bullets and stuff and shrapnel was flying all over the place. So I lost 8 men on an operation there in, I think it was April the 8th. It was early April in 68.
All of them, you lost all of them on the beach?
Yeah, just before we got off. But as we were trying to get off.
How many of those firefights do you think you saw in Vietnam? Terry Sater.
That's still a big mystery for me. I've always said that I remembered about a dozen, but other guys I served with said that we were in 100. So I don't really know. And of course, I think it depends on what you would classify as a firefighter, what you would classify as action. We were under more mortar attacks than I could ever count. I have no idea how many mortar attacks we were in or how many times we took sniper fire. And I've always felt, too, that if you took 2 guys and handcuffed them together and you sent them into the Vietnam War or Iraq or Afghanistan, and they spent the whole time handcuffed together, and you asked them what it was like when they came back, you would get 2 entirely different answers, because everybody filters it through their own eyes, their own emotions. And like on my boat, when I was in my 20 millimeter cannon gun mount, I had a slit about 9 or 10 inches, maybe a foot wide, that I saw all the action through. Just rotated the turret back and forth. That's the only part of the battlefield that I saw. The guy on I was on the starboard 20. The guy on the port 20 saw things completely different. Guys in the well deck saw things completely different from us. The guy on the Mark 19 on the stern up above the rest of us, he saw things different than we did. And, one guy might be looking one way and see somebody get their head blown off, and another guy is looking the other direction and doesn't see anything.
More stories from River Rats are coming your way after a short break. The Wall That Heals 2024 tour schedule has just been announced. In its 29th season, this 3/4 scale replica of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial and the mobile education center that travels with it will visit 33 communities, starting in Hilo, Hawaii, and ending in Panama City, Florida. You can find all the details at vvmf.org.
Hello, I'm Gary Sinise. Nearly 3 million Americans served in Vietnam, and more than 58,000 have their names inscribed on the wall. Those that pay the ultimate price in service to America. Some might ask why the Vietnam War still matters. It matters because more than 58,000 lives were cut short and their families forever changed. It matters because we should never forget how Vietnam veterans were treated when they came home. A lesson learned so that our current generation of veterans are treated with respect. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, the organization that built the wall, works to ensure that future generations will understand the war's impact. I'm asking you to help keep the promise the wall was built on. Never forget. Visit vvmf.org to find out how you can get involved.
Our little podcast has crossed a significant threshold in its journey of growth. It has now been listened to more than 250,000 times. To celebrate and commemorate this milestone, we created a special limited edition collectible coin. It's a bronze challenge coin with the Echoes of the Vietnam War logo in color on one side and the VVMF logo blind embossed on the other. The Echoes of the Vietnam War collectible coin is available as a thank you for your gift of $100 or more, which you can make by going to vvmf.org/echoes and scrolling down to the bottom of the page where it says Support Echoes. Remember, this is a limited edition coin. We really didn't make very many of them, so get yours today before they're all gone. And thanks for helping us get from 0 to 250,000 and beyond. The Registry is an online community created by VVMF that connects veterans of the Vietnam War era with each other. By signing up for the Registry, you can upload and share stories and images, connect with others who served during the Vietnam era, and connect your service with people you knew whose names are now on the wall. Join the community and preserve your legacy or a family member's by signing up today at vvmf.org/registry. Direct enemy contact wasn't the only threat to the river rats of the Mekong Delta. Men were lost to environmental hazards, friendly fire, and accidents of every imaginable kind. Here's Terry Sater.
Quite a few guys actually died from drowning. The Mekong was a deadly river, and I'm not sure what made it so deadly. The appearance of it, I always compare it to the Mississippi River. You know, St. Louis here, we don't live too far from the Mississippi. It's wide and brown and moves pretty fast. But I think that the Mekong had a lot of turbulence in it. If you don't mind me bringing up one amazing example of courage that I saw there, didn't have anything to do with combat. My boat was tied up outboard of a bunch of the boats one night in the Mekong. And we were out in the middle of the Mekong, and there was probably a dozen or so boats tied up. My boat was on the outside. I heard a splash in the water, and I heard somebody in the dark. It was pitch black. Somebody yelled, "Man overboard, man overboard." And a guy, Bill Martell, who was about halfway back to where the ships were on the boats, grabbed a life preserver and jumped into the pitch black night air into the Mekong to go rescue this guy. I just thought that was amazing. And he said that he could hear the guy yelling that he was going down. And so Bill Martell yelled to him to kick his boots off. And he said, "I just got him." He was a guy that was on one of the ships normally, and getting the jungle boots was kind of a great souvenir, I guess. And he says, "Kick him off or you're going to drown." And he says, "I just got him." He says, "Kick him off, I'll get you a new pair." So the guy kicked him off, and Bill Martell saved his life. And Bill Martell told me that later he did get the guy a new pair of jungle boots and a pair of BC sandals made out of tires. But I often think about Bill Martell because, like in combat, you do what you have to do to save your own life and the lives of those around you. I just did my job. But Bill Martell chose to risk his life, grab that life preserver, and jump into the pitch black night to save this guy that he didn't know. And I just thought that was amazing.
In those initial weeks or months of being there and doing that job in that place at that time, what were the biggest surprises for you, good or bad? Here's Bob Schrader.
I think probably when I took a helicopter ride on a medevac just to do some liaison with other hospital facilities in the area. And when they dropped me off at the ship, they went over shoreside to drop off another MSC that had been along at his facility. And when they took off from there, for some reason, the aircraft crashed. They think the theory was that he saw the flashing red light on a tower and thought it was another helicopter or another aircraft, and stalled it and dropped it into the Mekong. But the next morning I was in my quarters and I had a landline from my radio operator to me in my quarters, a crank job. And it was ringing like mad, and I answered the phone, and they summoned me to the pontoon next to the ship. And when I got up there, or up and down there, discovered that there was a crew member caught between the pontoon itself and one of the ships that was tied up there. And when we got him out of the water, I discovered that that was the pilot that had been flying the aircraft the day before. And so I kind of experienced war firsthand right there. And
yeah, I'm sorry, Bob. I'm going to need. I want to clarify. So the crash occurred at night, and the next morning, and this pilot had survived the crash.
He had not.
He had not.
Nobody
How did he
survive? The divers the next day went down and found the helicopter and the rest of the crew. His body had broken loose from the wreckage and floated down the river, and perchance hooked up on the side of the ship
and got wedged? Got it.
And one of the command and control helicopters brought a wounded soldier in and brought him to our flight deck, and we got him down to the surgical clinic so they could treat him.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the crew members was taking his gear out of the helicopter and grabbed the guy's shotgun around the barrel like that and pulled on it, and the trigger mechanism was caught up in the harness, and it went off, shot his hand. And I'm standing right there next to him when that happened. And I took his wrist and I led him down the ramp and down into our surgical facility and
wow,
took care of him there.
And how old are you while all this is going on?
Oh,
22, 21?
Older than that, but about, I got to think a little, born in 44 and that was 68. So
yeah, 24.
President Nixon was elected and became president in 1969. And Nixon ran on the platform of ending the war.
Harry Hahn.
You know, he wanted to get us out of Vietnam. So his tool in doing that, if you want to call it that, was what he called a Vietnamization. And Vietnamization was supposed to turn over the equipment, the training, and develop the South Vietnamese Army to the point that, and Navy, to where they could take over the war, and we wouldn't have to fight the war. The U.S. involvement would end. So, you know, starting in 1969, with Vietnamization, we started to turn over the boats to the South Vietnamese.
Okay.
So we started first in 69 with River Division 9-1, 9-2, and then turned over 11-1 and 11-2, and then in 1970 turned over river squadrons 13 and then 15. So at the end of 1970, going towards 71, is when the Mobile Riverine Force, as it was known, existed no longer. All the boats were turned over to the Vietnamese.
Randy Pete.
In spite of everything that I have been through, if I had to do it over again, I would. In spite of the Agent Orange, which I have terminal cancer, so I'm,
Oh, Randy.
I'm beyond the point where they can do anything for me from a immunotherapy point of view and all of that. So now, every 90 days, I get scanned, and we just wait for the cancer to come back, and then we take care of it with radiation or removal or whatever, ablation or whatever.
When did you find out?
I've been dealing with this since I was 56. The first cancer was prostate, and we removed my prostate, and then the next cancer was kidney, and we didn't catch that one quick enough, and so it metastasized. So it's, all over. But I've made my peace. I've had a good life.
Doc Jones.
First thing you learn, I guess, is you always, in your mind, have a place where you're going to be if something happens. And it doesn't, at first it's a conscience thing, a conscious effort. And later on, it's ingrained that you've already seen if something happened here where you'd be, and it's already programmed in your head pretty much. So the bullets start flying, you're somewhere already. It's just like a self-preservation thing, because you say you're looking for a big tree to hide behind or a ditch to jump in, or it's just there. You know that, but then you have that feeling the rest of your life. You always know if something happens where you're going to be, kind of. Okay. It's an awareness thing. It's part of PTSD, I'm sure, of everything else. It's just an unconscious thing.
Yeah. Yeah, you enter an unfamiliar situation and just, some part of your brain is figuring out, okay, where can I take cover?
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And Doc, how many tours did you do?
Just one.
Just the one. Do you mind if I ask how old you are?
I was 21 at the time.
No, I mean now.
Now I'm 76.
So out of 76 years on the planet, you spent one in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And you still walk into a room and figure out where you're going to take cover if some shit goes down.
Oh, yeah. Because the other thing there is life and death.
Yeah. I just think it's remarkable. It's 1 year out of 76, and you still carry it with you.
Oh, yeah. I think most of us do.
How important has it been for you to be part of this group?
It's probably my favorite activity, with the exception of getting and leaving here. I traveled a lot, and it's like traveling isn't as enjoyable as it used to be.
Yeah.
But it's good to be here. Traveling is getting more difficult, I think, for all of us as time goes on.
Thanks to Harry Hahn, Doc Jones, A.J. McCaskey, Frank Moran, Randy Pete, Terry Sater, and Bob Schrader for sharing their stories, and to all of the other river rats who spoke to me for these 2 episodes. Even if you didn't hear your voice in the podcast, know that your contribution helped give shape and context to the final product. Terry Sater's book is available at Amazon.com. It's called The Nightmare of the Mekong, A True History of Love, Family, and the War in Vietnam. And for those of you who saw and loved Scramble the Sea Wolves as much as I did, I have some great news. The same filmmakers who made that, Jeff and Shannon Arbaio, are working on a documentary about the river rats. It should be out next spring. I promise I'll keep you posted. For those of you who may have missed it, we started putting up little mini episodes called postscripts, and they're like little companion pieces to the full episodes. There will be a postscript to River Rats coming very soon, an interview with a remarkable young woman named Dakota Tolbert. She was raised by her grandfather, a river rat and the recipient of a Silver Star and 2 Bronze Stars, one with valor. Although he passed away a few years ago, Dakota still attends the River Rats reunions as a way of feeling closer to him, honoring his service and that of all veterans. Keep an eye out for that. Of course, if you just subscribe to Echoes wherever you get your podcasts, you'll never miss an episode or a postscript. They'll just magically show up on your smartphone every time we release a new one. That's it for 2023. If you find yourself jonesing for more Echoes over the holidays, may I suggest revisiting episode 19, Christmas and the Vietnam War. I just gave it another listen myself, and I have to say, it did put me in the holiday spirit in a complicated kind of way. We'll be back in mid-January with more stories of service, sacrifice, and healing. See you then.